Welcome to Behind the Advice, the podcast for Australians living abroad who want to maximise their financial situation. I'm your host, Mitchell Kelsey, a financial advisor at Runway Wealth Management, and in each episode, I'll be sitting down with other experts and professionals to get their insights, stories, and expertise on key concepts for Australian expats, as well as providing my own perspective. With this being a financial podcast, there is a disclaimer, so any information that you hear in today's episode is general information only. It is not personal advice, so it does not take into account your personal situation, goals, or objectives. If you do need personal advice, feel free to reach out to us at Runway Wealth Management for personal financial advice. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Advice podcast. Today's episode is especially relevant for Australians living in the US or considering a move to the United States. We're diving into the US visa system and how visa choices can have a long-term financial and tax implications that many Australian expats don't anticipate. Today, I'm joined by New York-based immigration attorney Tara Gray, founder and principal attorney of the law office of Tara Gray, who specialises in helping Australian expats navigate temporary visas, green cards, and US citizenship. How are you today, Tara?
I'm doing good. Thanks for that introduction, Mitchell.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on the podcast today. And I hear there's some pretty bad snowstorms in New York at the moment. How are you kind of managing those at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we got hit pretty bad at the weekend. Had a real snow day, but the city, seems to be clearing it up pretty good. Although the temperatures are cold, so a lot of it is turning into ice everywhere, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, New York, you're used to it. You got to get, from time to time. So you got the systems in place, I guess, to kind of manage that.
Exactly.
Well, let's crack into it. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to specialising in helping, Australians in particular, navigate the US immigration system?
Yeah, sure. So, as you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK, and I got my law degree in the UK and went to law school over there, and initially worked in employment law in the UK.
Right.
And then when I moved to the US permanently, I kind of had to have a rethink into what direction I wanted my career to go in. And I'd had some experience with immigration law, having done my own paperwork to move over here. And I just became more and more interested in it. And I worked firstly at a US-UK immigration law firm and just kind of delved deeper into the US immigration side of things. And then went on to work in-house for a few tech companies at a law firm. And in 2019, that's really when I decided to branch out on my own and start the law office of Tara Gray.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've had quite the journey there. And I think it helps when you've got, I guess, your first-hand account in terms of how you went through the US immigration system, how you got your visa. So I'm sure that is invaluable and really helps when you're speaking to your clients.
Yeah, exactly. And then, with having an Australian client base, that really came about with me and helping initially some friends, Australian friends, with their visas who were my first clients, and they kind of told their friends and their friends told other people. And then, I got mentioned on some of the Australian forums on Facebook, and yeah, my Australian client base really grew from there. And
yeah, just word of mouth. That's fantastic.
Yeah, they're a great bunch. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and then so what types of Australians are you typically working with, like professionals, business owners, families?
So a mix, really. I have a lot of professionals that come to me who have job offers in the US, and they'll be looking for professional types of visas, such as the E3 and the H1B, maybe the O1. And then sometimes, I'll have clients who already have a business abroad in Australia
Yep.
and want to branch out to the US or even just start in the US. And also, sometimes I'll get clients who are married to US citizens and looking to pursue the path of a marriage green card. So a real mix, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from our standpoint at Runway Wealth Management, we see a lot of professionals moving to the United States, particularly on that E3 visa, which is the Australian kind of specialty visa. I think if we look at the US visa system, is there anything that you say, like, why is it maybe a little bit more confusing for Australians compared to other countries?
Yeah, so I find actually that a lot of my clients, like many of the professional type clients, have or are planning to go on visas to the UK. And they tell me a lot how much easier it is for them to obtain a visa there. And typically, those are like the UK, Canada, New Zealand are the other countries that Australians seem to be interested in. And I think the difference is that they're Commonwealth countries, so there is an easier path for them to obtain those visas. And the US system, immigration system itself is just very complicated and difficult, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's what they're up against. It is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe some Australians are used to maybe getting a visa into New Zealand, for example, which is so easy, particularly, with other Commonwealth countries, as you said, particularly the UK, it's a lot easier for Australians to kind of get a visa over there. With the US visa system, have you seen any kind of major changes in the visa system in the US more recently, say in the last couple of years?
There's a lot of changes. Those ones that I'm seeing affecting my Australian clients, a big one is the diversity visa lottery.
Right.
That's, it's from certain countries, they can apply in a lottery for a green card, essentially. And that is kind of on pause at the moment. And then a big one that's affecting my clients is previously they could attend consular appointments in other countries. So a lot of my Australian clients with their renewals, they go to London to renew because it's a lot closer for them. But now they have to go back to their home country unless they have citizenship or residency in another country. So that has really, put a strain on appointments. There's a real backlog, and it's requiring clients to plan much further ahead, especially with renewals. Additionally, there used to be the mail-in option. So a lot of my Australian clients would go back, put their renewal application in the mail and receive their passport back in the mail. However, now they actually have to attend a consulate appointment. So again, it's kind of like creating a big backlog in the appointment system.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those US visas, they only have like a 2-year term. So you come back to Australia, for example, renew your visa, and then you've already got to start thinking about your next return to the consulate to renew it again in 2 years' time.
Exactly. And then, with Australia, they have to, take a lot of time out with their vacation to go back because it isn't an easy flight.
And what's the latest on that? Is this kind of like a temporary measure? Or is this something that you see is probably going to be something a little bit more permanent where if you want to renew your visa, you've got to return to your home country to do it?
I think for now, at least under the current administration, I don't expect it to change. But perhaps, in the future, during COVID, there were a lot of restrictions in place with attending consulates of third country nationals as well. And then that reverted back somewhat after COVID lifted, not fully, but somewhat. So hopefully in the future, more options will become open again.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really interesting about the green card lottery that you mentioned is on pause. I wasn't aware of that. I think just the concept of there being a lottery for a green card just sounds quite interesting from an Australian standpoint. So I remember I
Right.
spoke to a prospective client, many years ago, and she actually won a green card through that visa system. So it's quite funny.
Yeah, and it's surprising because I have some clients who won it first time, and other clients will say, "Oh, I entered it, 6, 7 times and never won it." So you just don't know. It truly is a lottery.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've touched on green cards and temporary visas. What are some of the most common visas that you see Australians applying for and then moving to the US on?
Yeah, so the E3 visa is definitely up there. It is specific to Australians.
Yeah,
Only Australians can apply for it, which is nice for Australians
yeah,
because, many other foreign nationals just don't have that type of option and they're kind of put in with everyone else and don't have their own kind
yeah.
of visa. For the E3 visa, you do have to have a job offer in the
Yep.
US, so an employer sponsor. And they do have to offer you a job that's a specialty occupation.
Yes.
So it has to require at least a bachelor degree, the position. And in turn, your education experience has to tie in with the role. Sometimes I see clients start on E3 and then they might switch to H1B later down the
Okay.
line.
Yep.
That's if they intend on or are considering applying for a green card in the future,
Yep.
because it does make a smoother path to green card. Um, Another one I see a bit of with my Australian clients is E2 visa.
Okay. Yep.
Under the E2 visa, they can set up their own business in the US. It does require a significant investment into the business prior to applying for the visa,
Right.
and a really solid business plan. But it's definitely one I'm starting to see more and more come up. And
And
then
that's specific to Australians as well, the E2.
that's no, that's all. That's open to other countries
Okay.
as well.
Yep.
Not all
Yep.
countries. It's a treaty trader visa, so just particular countries it's applicable to. But Australia is one of those countries. And
Right.
the fees for it are a lot heavier than the
Yep.
E3 visa. It has a big reciprocity fee that's tied to it. But yeah, it's definitely one to consider if
Yeah. You're looking to set
someone's
up a business.
thinking starting a business. And then green cards, employment sponsored green cards, and I do a lot of family based green cards for both clients that are married to US citizens, but also clients who've already got the citizenship and they're looking at sponsoring family members in
Okay.
Australia
Yep.
to move over, such as parents, for example.
Sure. Okay. All makes sense. And I think in terms of what we see, the two most common would be the E3, as you've discussed, and then the L1 is quite popular, at least initially, the intracompany transfer visa. A lot of people are kind of getting, a lot of it Aussies getting posted over there.
Yeah, so with the L1, the intercompany transfer, it's easier to do an E3 rather than the L1.
Right. Okay.
But if the client is thinking of eventually going for the green card, then the L1 makes more sense because it's a natural path to a green
Understood.
card. Whereas E3, being a non immigrant intent visa, is not a straightforward path to green card. So it does depend on individual situations, but as for obtaining the visa, it's much more straightforward and cheaper to go for the E3 over the L1.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting. And which of the temporary visas would you say gives people the most flexibility from, I guess, a lifestyle and employability standpoint?
So The visa that gives the most flexibility and lifestyle options,
Hmm.
I would say, is actually the E3D visa.
Oh,
So that's
okay.
the dependent visa of the
Yep.
E3. So that's given to spouses of E3 visa holders. And when they enter the US, they receive employment authorization and under that, they can do any type of role. For any employer, they can have multiple jobs, they can set up their own business, they can not work, they
Wow.
have complete freedom.
Yeah.
So in a way, I would say that's the best one.
And how do you apply for that? You just need to have a spouse that's on the E3. What's kind of the eligibility requirements?
Yeah. So all you have to do is have a spouse that's
Hmm.
on an E3 visa, and then you apply with them at the consulate at the
Hmm.
same time by showing your marriage certificate, and then you are issued the E3D.
Right.
Um, or your spouse, say you're engaged to someone who's on
Hmm.
an E3 already, and then you get married, then you go to the consulate on your own, showing their immigration status, your spouse's immigration status, and the marriage certificate, and obtain the E3D that way.
Right. Okay. And it's still just a 2 year term on those, similar to the E3.
Exactly. Yeah, it
Yep. Okay.
follows the same dates as your E3 spouse. So it's only valid so long as they are in status.
Sure.
So the downside is say the E3 spouse loses employment, then the E3D partner also loses their
Right.
eligibility.
Okay. Understood. And that makes sense to have the two terms kind of align there. Otherwise, you've got different terms, and as a couple, you might be having to renew your visa every 12 months because you're on different term cycles. So that
Exactly.
makes complete sense. Thinking about green cards and US citizenship, when are you kind of starting to see Australian expats come to you thinking about citizenship or green card status for that matter?
Yeah, so then seeing them think about green card status, usually like 3 or 4 renewals into
Yep.
the E3 visa. Now, the good thing about E3 is it is renewable indefinitely.
Yeah. Yep.
However, after a while, they do get sick of having to
Get sick of
go
it.
back
Yep.
to keep renewing it and kind of being tied to one employer.
Hmm.
So at that time, I see people considering the green card path, or if someone has made a life for themselves over here
Yeah.
and gets married to a US citizen, they'll start thinking about green card that way.
Yep.
Now with citizenship, they can't apply for citizenship until they receive the green card. So if they receive the green card based on marriage,
Hmm.
they can apply for citizenship 3 years after the start date of the green
Okay.
card.
Yep.
If it's based on employment or diversity visa lottery, it's 5 years after the start date of the green
Okay.
card.
Yeah, sure. That kind of really aligns with what I'm seeing with my clients. Nationally, I speak with a lot of clients based in the United States, and there are some tax considerations associated with going down the path of green card, of going down the path of obtaining a green card or US citizenship status. And usually it's prompted, the catalyst for that is just not wanting to constantly renew that temporary visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it with clients that probably want to have a little bit more of a longer term stint, if not permanent, in the United States. They've really kind of set up themselves in the US and probably not looking to return, in 10, 15, 20 plus years time, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is that I always tell my clients, and when they're thinking about green card, that they should consider if they are wanting to stay here long
Hmm.
term or not, because if they're only wanting to stay a few more years, it might not be worth it them getting the
Yeah.
green card, especially with any kind of tax implications, and they should get advice on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm asking. That's the first question I ask in terms of when they're asking me the question, should we go down the path of the green card or citizenship? It's kind of like, well, are you planning on coming back in the short term? Because if so, it's probably not worth it. And I think it's probably a good dovetail into, I guess, some of the financial planning implications of being in the United States, regardless of your visa status, whether that be a temporary visa or green card, US citizenship, you're going to be a resident for tax purposes in the United States. And you're remiss of me not to kind of mention some of the tax issues that you can kind of run into. So for us at Runway, kind of working with Australians in the United States, two main issues that we see are clients that still hold Australian assets that are deemed or considered as what's called a passive foreign investment company, or a PFIC. It's a US designation and effectively refers to any passive investment structures that they hold outside of the United States. So really commonly for Australians, they might have some Australian domiciled ETFs or managed funds. These are going to be considered passive foreign investment companies from a US standpoint and need to be reported on a US tax return. There's some additional forms that are associated with that. And just broadly speaking, the tax is a little bit more punitive the tax treatment is a little bit more punitive than some other kind of alternative investments that they might be able to access. So that's something, for any Australians kind of considering a move to the United States, just really ensuring that your Australian assets are compliant from a US standpoint is really, really critical. And so that's kind of the PFIC rules, the passive foreign investment company rules. The other area is superannuation. So superannuation, bit of a contentious area. I think we're speaking with a lot of US tax accountants in our role, kind of coordinating, our clients' affairs with their US tax accountant. And not a lot of US tax accountants quite know how to kind of treat an Australian superannuation funds. Broadly speaking, if you're contributing to your super funds, that contribution can be treated as assessable income, and it can also change the tax treatment in terms of how your Australian super fund is treated from a US standpoint. So there are two broad treatments. There's an employee benefits trust, which is the more favorable treatment, and then you've got a foreign grantor trust, which is a much more punitive in tax nature. So I think those are two key issues that I see for Australians in the United States, and kind of dovetails into that conversation we were having before around green card status, US citizenship, because if you continue to hold that green card or go down the path of US citizenship and then you return to Australia, those tax considerations follow you. So as you know, the US has a global taxation that they tax their citizens on a global basis. So you need to kind of abide by those rules and considerations even when you're back in Australia. So that kind of, I guess, limits you from an Australian financial planning perspective when you continue to maintain those US tax ties.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think, speaking of maybe some mistakes, what are some of the biggest mistakes you sometimes see Australian expats make when it comes to from an immigration perspective?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is too much looking at forums for advice.
Right. Sure.
Or Facebook groups, because people out there might give their take on things and what happened to them, but their situation might not be the same as yours, because there might be that slight difference that takes you off in a different path, and the people are following this advice from non-professionals and starting off on the wrong foot, and it's having other consequences perhaps further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can relate to that. We're constantly looking in those Australian expat forum groups, and some people are just so absolute, unequivocal in what they're saying that like it's just their own personal kind of view, but they're so absolute in what they what they think they know, but it could be just be completely wrong, when you
Yeah.
consider that particular person's circumstances, and you can
Mhm.
see how people just can kind of undo themselves by just following some information by someone on a Facebook forum, for example.
Mhm. Mhm. It's scary, some of the things that you see.
It is scary,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, unfortunately, some people just learn the hard way in that sense. In that sense, green cards. When we think about a green card, and people, yeah, as you said, there's certainly merit in going down the path of getting a green card. Certainly from a flexibility standpoint, like not having to continuously kind of renew a temporary visa. So we see a lot of clients, they get the green card and then they come back to Australia and they need to go through that process of abandoning the green card. So what does that process look like?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward actually. All they have to do is, file the paperwork and the supporting documents with USCIS, and then wait for the confirmation that they've abandoned their green card.
Yep.
But it's important for them to remember, once they have abandoned the green card, that they can no longer return to the US on the green card anymore. Although they would have actually given
They return
USCIS
the
the
card.
green card
Yeah.
back. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So they will need to, at that point, either return on a visa or an ESTA.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a common
And
mistake. Sorry, you
go
go.
ahead. Yeah, just the other way as well, it can be abandoned is if they've been outside of the US for an extended period of time, and when they return, Customs Border Patrol deem them to have forgone their residency. They could actually ask them at the border to sign the paperwork to abandon
All
the
right.
green card there. Yeah.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I'm very familiar with the form that you need to fill out. I think it's Form I-407.
Hmm.
And what I sometimes see as a mistake is when you come back to Australia, and again, kind of touching on the financial and tax implications of the green card, the green card status. When you come back to Australia, and if you have not abandoned that green card, you are essentially still a permanent resident from a US standpoint, and
Yeah.
consequently, you're also a US tax resident. So you have
Hmm.
people, a lot of Australians return to Australia. They don't go through that process of formally abandoning their green card, and they might kind of just let it sit there for 2-3 years and then not file a US tax return, for example. So they have a tax liability essentially for the last 3 years because they were a US tax resident. So it's really critical to formally abandon that green card using the relevant form or the procedures that you just mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people just don't realize that they need to do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then,
absolutely.
like I say, they return to the US later on that green card. And then there's issues at the border, which you really just don't want to get into.
Absolutely, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the process for, I guess, or abandoning the green card. How about citizenship? This is a little bit more of a involved process, probably a little bit more costly. What's kind of just generally involved in that process?
Yeah. So, with renouncing citizenship, abandoning the citizenship, you have to actually leave the US, and you do have to have legal status in another country.
Hmm.
And then you go to the US embassy in that country,
Yep.
and pay the fees and sign like the affidavit
Hmm.
to renounce it there.
Sure. Okay. We've touched on kind of abandoning the green card and then renouncing citizenship. I'll just touch on, again, some of the US tax implications that may occur when you go through the act of abandoning legal lawful permanent resident status in the United States. So the US has an exit tax. This is kind of a bit of a foreign concept for many countries. Not some other countries also have exit taxes, but it's quite punitive. The the US exit tax is quite punitive. It's as part of the Hart Act of 2008 that these provisions come under. So essentially, it's to determine whether or not you would be subject to this exit tax, you need to understand whether or not you're considered a covered expatriate. So a covered expatriate in almost all circumstances is going to be a US citizen that abandons their green card. That abandons their US citizenship status. From a green card standpoint, if you've held that green card during 8 of the last 15 tax years, that's when you also are considered a covered expatriate for the purposes of this exit tax. And essentially, this exit tax, it's a capital gains tax event on your global assets. There are a number of tests. So once you're kind of considered a covered expatriate, there are then a number of tests that you need to work through to determine if you do need to pay this exit tax. So just because you're a covered expatriate doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be subject to this exit tax. But broadly speaking, if you're a high net worth individual, generally if you've got net assets greater than US 2 million, and you are deemed a covered expatriate, you're going to be subject to some form of exit tax as part of expatriating from the United States. And I think maybe US citizens are aware of this, but certainly I come across a lot of Australians that have the green card and aren't aware of those tax implications or those exit taxes that may apply where you've held that green card for a number of years. I think just kind of rounding out the discussion there, if for an Australian kind of considering moving to the US in the next 12 to 24 months, what should they be thinking about now?
Mm-hmm. I think they should be thinking about, what type of industry they want to go into, what type of job they want to obtain here, and then really start networking with people in the US. They'll find that a lot of jobs aren't necessarily advertised, but it's more through word of mouth and networking that they find positions. Yep. So it's even, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, asking friends and family that already live here if they know someone who's in your industry that would be interested in speaking to you. I would take that as a top priority, and then once they get a potential job offer and seeking the appropriate advice to find out what visa would be most suitable and whether they would be eligible for it and the timelines and such.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can kind of second that in terms of, getting some advice. Obviously that's kind of that might be something obvious for me to say as a financial advisor. I think, 12, 24 months out, I think do some research. I think the US in particular has, like, having worked with clients in, over 25 countries, the US in particular has some unique rules that you don't really see anywhere else in the world in terms of how you can manage your wealth in the US and outside of the United States. There are some really unique provisions as part of unique provisions that you need to be aware of when moving to the United States as an Australian. So just having that information is just going to allow you to make informed decisions. So that would kind of be my 2 cents in terms of Australian expats that are thinking about moving in the next 12 to 24 months. One last piece of advice you give to an Australian expat heading to the US?
I think the last piece of advice kind of follows on from what you said, and really plan ahead, not just with immigration and finances, but with the move overall. Say you're moving to New York. Before you come, find out about the different neighborhoods and which one would be suited to your kind of setup. Look into, how you rent a property over here if you don't have any US credit history. Find other people that also, in the Australian community that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm in this situation, like, how do I find a doctor? How does US health insurance work? Kind of, the more you do before you come, the smoother your transition will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those kinds of areas, that's where those Facebook forums are fantastic. Maybe just don't take everyone's word for it when it comes to the tax and the immigration comments and things like that. But I think certainly for those personal aspects of moving to a new country and just kind of really settling into the way of life there, that's really where those groups are super, super advantageous.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, it's been a really great discussion, Tara. So thanks so much for jumping on the podcast today. Where can listeners find out more about Tara Gray Law?
Yeah, and they can go to my website. It's tara@taragraylaw.com.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of Behind the Advice, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Cheers.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you want to learn more about Runway Wealth Management and how we help Australian expats, feel free to jump onto our website, runwaywealth.com, and we're also on all the social media platforms.